Jason. Today's episode of the Lee Summit Town Hall podcast is brought to the good people by Budget Blinds of Lee
Budget
Summit.
Blinds!
You know, I got to tell you something, Jason. It's 60-something degrees outside today, and hearing you yell Budget Blinds just feels better.
And the weather's good?
The weather's good, which means it's probably time to update your home.
Look, it's the weather. You're going to open your windows. You're going to have that. You need to improve your window treatment game, and Budget Blinds has the Signature Series shades for you to do it.
And here's a really cool deal. Even if, say maybe you get adventurous this spring and you leave the humble confines of Lee Summit and you stagger over to those weird friends of yours across the state line, you'll still have Budget Blinds to go to. There is a new Budget Blinds storefront opening in Overland Park coming in May.
You got it. So no matter which side of the state line you're on, you can get your quality
You should stay in Missouri.
Robot Shade Overlord Signature Series shades from Budget Blinds in Lee Summit. And we also, we want to take a moment. Look, we have said many times over the years that we consider the folks at Budget Blinds our friends. They do a lot of good in the community. And we don't often talk about Mr. Budget Blinds, Jim Stoddard.
The Overlord himself.
Jim Stoddard, who had a birthday, and he turned 29-ish. At least it's a multiple of that. On Monday of this week. And so we want to say happy birthday, Jim. And you should give Jim a birthday present and go buy some shades from Budget Blinds.
And when you do it, when you go visit our friends at Budget Blinds, tell them Jason and Nick sent you.
Hello again, and welcome to Lee Summit Town Hall, a weekly podcast about what you can do to make a difference. I am Jason Norbury, and I am joined by a man who is thankful that it is not his fault this time. It is Nick Parker, the publisher of Link to Lee Summit.
So very thankful.
It is.
Because last time it was
literally last,
and the time before that, and the time before that.
And as husbands in a house, husbands in a house, it's mostly our fault. I mean, whatever it is, it's pretty much always our fault. So
I'm kind of used to it by now. But today
it is not Nick's fault. Our unofficial sponsor today is a pleasant outdoor walk. Which, I mean, so I want to let everybody a little behind the curtain. So last week we had some technical difficulties, and these were my bits from last week, but they both pleasantly apply this week. So that's great. It was nice last week. We had a little dip in the temperature, but it was a lovely, lovely 60-degree day today, and had a little time to get to.
I took a walk.
Nice to spend a little bit of outside time in this day. So as I go, so Nick, what's going on at Lee Summit?
Well, as I took my walk this afternoon, I remembered there's some news. There's an event. Can you believe it? We don't get to tease events very often anymore, but there is an event coming up this weekend. This weekend, it is the Downtown Lee Summit Spring Open House, which is important and it's fun. It's a great time to go out, go shopping, check out all the downtown businesses and stores. But more importantly, Jason, you and I and the Town Hall podcast have teamed up with Local Foundry there at 307 Market Street in downtown Lee Summit for tacos and burgers. That's right. We are selling tacos and burgers this Saturday outside Local Foundry, and we're doing it to raise money for Lee Summit Social Services.
Absolutely. We've even allowed the executive director of Lee Summit Social Services to join us because honestly, we needed somebody to cook the burgers. And Matt was the guy we thought of when we did that. So we will be out there from about 11 o'clock on through. We sell out of what we have, selling some tacos and some burgers. And
but you want the
tacos. And if we're out of tacos, you can still get burgers. I'm sure there'll be those left when this is all said and done.
And Jason, I'm going to let you in on
Go
something.
for it.
These aren't just tacos; these are carnitas.
This is true. We are going to be special for you people.
Look. If you ask me to bring the game, I'm going to bring the
game. So we will be there. So come downtown, wander around outside, see what's going on. Enjoy what is scheduled to be a beautiful, beautiful spring-like day on Saturday. Swing by Local Foundry at 307 Market and get yourself a taco or BOE and support Lee Summit Social Services, we will thank you. And you can see us there. I mean, we'll be wearing masks, but we will be the ones behind them.
There we go. And now, Jason, to the meat of our episode.
Oh, it is silly season.
Hey, we're going to talk about the Lee Summit School District this week, but I want to start with a little bit of sad news. Over the weekend, former Superintendent Tony Stansberry passed away. Stansberry was the superintendent from 1996 through 2006, which was, Jason, I don't think I'm going to exaggerate when I'm going to say that is the period of biggest growth in our community that we've seen.
In a long time. It was a explosive growth, really, as a whole. He was superintendent when we just built a ton of buildings. And I guess if you want to get an idea of how well he's remember that the administration building is named for him.
Which I believe is one of 20-some facilities that were built during his tenure as superintendent. Yeah. So our thoughts are with the Stansberry family there and the district. Now, Jason, let's move on. You mentioned that it was election season. I'm going to get there, I promise, but I just saw my notes there. The other thing I was supposed to get to. The Lee Summit School District is now taking applications from residents for their middle school boundary study team. Jason, as the local reporter, I love covering this. These always get a little bit of fun.
Yeah, that's fun is the word for it. Look, I would say this is with the construction of the fourth middle school coming in the 22-23 school year when it's going to open, they're going to have to adjust the boundaries. So certain students are going to go to the new school, and those all come from somewhere else. You know, the movement comes around from that. So the boundaries for the middle schools will be adjusted at that point. Dr. Christine Moorhead was tabbed to be the principal of the building. That's the same year that the sixth graders will move into the middle school buildings themselves. So it's going to be a period of some significant change. And if you want input into how they're going to put those boundaries together and how they're going to work that process out, you should go to the district's website. I'm sure we will have a link on link to leesummit.com to the application so you can apply to be on that team and put your voice in where it's going to matter.
There we go. And now on to election season. Jason, our candidate interviews are going to begin next week. We will be talking to the 4 remaining inactive
I just got
a there are 5.
Nick, hold on. I'm sorry. We got I got a back from the back room. I got a correction. It was Dr. Whitney Moorhead, not Christine Moorhead. So your notes are terrible. That is going to be the principal of the building. So thank you to our upcoming guest for getting that squared away for us. And once again, I guess
that's it.
The period where it wasn't your fault is now over, Nick.
Short-lived, but a glorious short-lived moment. My apologies on that.
All right, to the election.
Jason, candidate interviews are going to begin next week. We will be talking to each of the 4, I'm going to call them active candidates. There are 5 candidates. However, last week, Monty Helm announced that he will no longer be campaigning for the seat, and he will be throwing his support behind Ryan Murdoch, the incumbent, and Roderick Sparks. Also coming soon to our website will be our annual survey that we send to our candidates. Those responses are going to be posted to linktoleesummit.com, so be looking for those. Now, Jason,
bring them on.
Let's get into it. We're going to talk a little bit about the Board of Education. We're going to talk not necessarily about the individual candidates, but I think it's important for us to talk about the role the board plays and the relationship it has with not only the superintendent that it hires, but with the district and the community as a whole. And I feel like, Jason, you and I have we've done this episode a few times now as part of this podcast, and you and I have said a lot of the same things. So I thought we would bring in maybe a different perspective. And so we're going to be joined by Dr. John Schuler, a longtime teacher and administrator, now retired and working for University of Central Missouri and the Missouri State Education. So we will bring him on, and we're going to talk a little bit about that role and get his perspective.
Dr. Schuler, how are you today?
I'm great, guys. Thank you for having me on.
We're glad to have you here. So I guess, John, let's start with let's talk about you for a minute, because I know that's what you came on here to do, mostly is to talk about yourself. Yeah. You are a retired principal from, I believe, one of our middle schools here, and you are currently an...
Oh, no, I'm going to correct you
look,
now.
See?
He spent his career in Fort
Ah,
Osage.
okay. So
He's a resident of
Leslie
Lee Summit.
Summit. All right. So, but you are a retired principal, and you are now currently serving in a consultant capacity, working out of the University of Central Missouri, but not for the University of Central Missouri. But I'm going to let you explain here in just a second. So, tell us a little bit about what you do in your current position.
So right now, I'm what's called a district continuous improvement consultant, and I work out of the Regional Professional Development Center that's located at the University of Central Missouri. The university is our fiscal agent. So the federal grants that come through the Department of Education grants, they're filtered through the states, and the departments of education in the states, at least in the state of Missouri, then filters it through the regional professional development centers, which are located throughout the state of Missouri. So UMKC has an RPDC, as does Missouri State and SEMO and Truman and several others, all throughout the state. There's 9 regions. And and they filter out these grants and hire consultants. So I'm a facilitator for a team. I manage a team of consultants that works with the entire western side of the state. So my team is, we're split up into zones, and we help districts to use their own information, so their own evidence of student learning, to make decisions, basically. So, there's so many consultants that get paid a lot of money to come in, and they tell you, buy my product, buy my book. And that's not what we do. What we do is say, look, you're able to do this yourself. We'll show you how to do this if you don't know how to do it, but you don't have to hire someone else. You don't have to get a program. You don't have to pay a lot of money, because we're free, because we're grant funded. So we come in, and if they want us, then we come in and we help them. But I manage a team that goes to 25 different school districts across the western part of the state, and we help them with the various issues that they have.
All right, so we're going to use a recent event, and it's a couple of weeks old now, but that is fine. I think it's kind of an instructive thing to talk about, kind of where we want to discuss in terms of the role of the Board of Education and how it relates to the various constituencies that they happen. So recently, the district announced that it was going to count if a student failed a course in high school. A high school student failed a course in the fall semester, that was not going to impact their GPA. Now, they wouldn't get credit for the course, and they have to retake it or do those sorts of things, but it would not count against their GPA. And I think in a not unreasonable response to the stresses that have been put upon our students in the various modes of learning and all that. This information got out, and of course, as Facebook threads and Facebook groups are wont to do, there was some controversy expressed about this and how it might impact certain students and others. Like the people thought they were going to be, like, their kids would be harmed in relation to the grade point averages of the other students, and so on and so forth. And in that process, one of our school board members posted that, the process that went behind that. But this was definitely an administrative question. But I think there was a lot of issues raised by the public to their elected official, where, like, why didn't you do this, or what have you do that? So obviously this is, and I don't want to spend a time here. This is not where I don't think we want to get into the criticism or lack of criticism of the board's or the administration's wisdom in the decision, but we'll have used that as an entity. So this is a situation where the administration acted and the board has not acted on a particular topic. And I think that if you look back over the last, 15 years or so since Tony Stansberry, that a lot of the issues that have been going on in the public that you see have been a result of actual or perceived problems with the relationship between the school board and the superintendent, whether they gave the superintendent too much free rein or micromanaged the superintendent, or both at the same time, as I'm sure some people would like to think. So when you're kind of digging in, what when you're thinking about the administration's role, or the more precisely the Board of Education's role as it gets involved with that, what are you looking for there?
Well, with the Board of Education, their job is very specific, and it's going to sound like I'm double guessing myself or whatever, but it's their main job is to hire the superintendent, to hire a competent person to manage the district, to give all those jobs to him and or her, and that person, the superintendent, is supposed to lead and manage the district. The Board of Education manages one employee in the district, and that is the superintendent. Now, they also approve the money that's being spent, and they do represent the constituents who elected them. And as we know in Lee Summit, they represent everybody, because they're not, in some school districts, they go by district or different areas of the district. And that's not the way it is here in Lee Summit. They represent everybody in the district. So they're all at-large elected officials. So that's their job, is to approve funding and to hire the superintendent, to supervise the superintendent, and to basically make sure the district is running, to hear the concerns of the public, the people that they're representing.
Well, how does that seems to be quite a balance, right? Of managing and holding accountable,
right,
while also allowing. I mean, and I guess this is the problem. The balance that any good manager has, any good board or any good executive, right, is how do you manage and hold accountable without overstepping? And that seems to be. And like Jason said, it might be real, it might be perceived. It seems to be an issue that our board has had over the last several years.
Right. Well, our board also represents the teachers and employees of the district who live in the district. Regardless, they're a force, and they're one of the big reasons that one person or another gets elected. But they're still voters. They're still the constituents, and they still represent them. However, they in no way, if they start managing the buildings, it breaks down. The system breaks down, and it's a system that works if they let the superintendent run the district. Now, they should bring concerns to the superintendent. If their constituents have concerns, they are ethically obligated to bring those concerns to the superintendent. However, they should not interfere with any of the management of the buildings or decisions that are being made.
And again, I really only want to use this current decision as an example. I don't want to really get into the merits of the decision. I don't think that's our place, nor do I feel anywhere near qualified to discuss that. But when you say managing the buildings, I mean, is this something that fits into that, where this kind of a decision where the administration made a decision for the district for all three high school buildings, that on the grades, that this wouldn't be, does that example fit into what you're talking about? So
my understanding is the administrators in those three buildings got together and made that decision. And that, again, the superintendent then hires administrators in the buildings to run their buildings. And there's a certain amount of overseeing that has to be done, of course. But again, it's a systems issue. You can't micromanage the buildings, because that's not the superintendent's job. The superintendent's job is to hire very good administrators to run their buildings. And these are big buildings. I mean, this is a huge district. So they really need to hire the best, and they have. They've got great administrators in these buildings who are making decisions. Now, again, like you said, Nick, I mean, whether you agree with it or not, these people have a lot of experience that they're drawing on to make those decisions, and that's the decision they made. I mean, I've got an opinion about it. Not that it matters what I think, but it absolutely, I respect the fact that they made a decision.
So, John, I guess let's roll into one of the things we hear year after year from our candidates is that they're going to be pro teacher or more pro teacher than their opponents. So, while many campaign slogans don't carry a lot of meaning, that's something I don't think any. It's very rare. In fact, I think we would be the first. Is like someone running for the school board to say I'm anti-teacher. Seems a little bit weird. But what? So, to work with me on this one for a second. What can, I suppose I'll put it this way, or maybe I should ask you to debunk the myth of pro-teacher. What is pro-teacher? Can it actually mean for a board of education member? When we talk about this role, this we're managing the superintendent, not the buildings, let alone the classrooms where the teachers may be. What does being pro-teacher mean in that scenario?
Well, that's a tough one, Jason, because the truth of the matter is that, again, teachers are a big section of your constituents. All right. And for that matter, teachers may be your friends. You may have a large group of friends that are teachers or district employees, and you don't ignore what they're saying. But as far as interfering, that's just inappropriate for a board member to do. They should go to the superintendent with concerns and discuss it with the superintendent. Okay. I guess to answer your question, okay, maybe I'm dancing around it. You can say you're pro teacher, and who isn't? I guess.
Well, I can name a list, but that's a different podcast.
I've been accused of not being pro teacher, but
you were a principal though, so that's different. You didn't like the kids or the teachers.
Middle school principals never win, let me tell you. You can be pro teacher and still be a good school board member without interfering in the building. It's about listening, but it's about letting the system work the way it's supposed to work. And if a school board member interferes in building processes, and I've had that happen as a principal, I had it happen with a school board member, that he absolutely wanted to interfere in a very personal student issue that legally I couldn't tell him anything about, but he was demanding that I tell him, and it was inappropriate. And the system started breaking down at that point, and it ruined a lot of things that should have worked. And that's what will happen. The system will break down. The school board members start interfering in building practices or decisions made by administrators.
So I'll try to be a little bit, bring it up a little bit. So some of the things that are, I think, other issues that are on there, obviously one of the things that always comes up is teacher compensation. One of the topics that has been, I think, burbling through the background, especially as the district begins to go through its, work through and work on its equity plan, is the hiring of more teachers of varied backgrounds and people of color and other groups to do that. How can the board influence those things as they go?
Okay, good. That's a really good question, because when it comes to issues involving equity, I feel like the board should have a very strong voice with the superintendent and with the community, saying this is a direction we go. So many boards are being reactive. And when it comes to issues of equity or any controversial issue like that, it shouldn't be controversial. First off, that's the first thing I want to say. But when it comes to these issues, what I would like to see is a systemic approach to being proactive. So, okay, we've got equity, we've got perceived equity issues in the district. Well, what is the plan? What do we want to do? How do we want to tackle this from the reactive stage and the proactive stage, and sort of bring these pieces together so that we can have equity in the district? And sometimes it comes down to just basic decisions that are made about books and lessons and things like that. And other times it's community activities and involving the school district in more of those. I don't know. I'm just throwing spaghetti at the wall there when it comes to those ideas. But
You just
I'm
described
saying,
our.
Well, since we're talking, I'm going to jump in. Since we're talking about the role and the role of the board and the relationship it has. So where does it fall? I guess in the process, as far as making the I guess changing the policies and practices of a district. Does that come
okay,
board
yes,
down, or is that a pretty cohesive? Should it be? I guess cohesive between superintendent and board.
okay. So good. Thanks for clarifying that. Yes. So the board is in charge of approving policies, creating policies, and approving policies at the building level, which of course have to connect with the district policies. And so yes, that's where it would happen at that level. So again, it's not the board creating these things. It's the board has hired a superintendent, and they need to tell their employee, this is what we want. And it sounds weird, but that's the way it has to work. They work with the superintendent, they listen to the community, they connect with the community, and they listen to what they want. They report that to the superintendent and work with the superintendent to come up with a plan. But again, that's the way it needs to be. Where they are working on policies, they would look at their policies to put it through that lens, an equity lens. And you'd be surprised at how many policies, for instance, when you say, this is an automatic, 3 strikes and you're out sort of rule, the equivalent of that at the building level. I mean, you put that through an equity lens and it probably doesn't stand up. So those are the kind of things that the board can do, is look at the policies, look at it through a different lens, listen to the community and what they want, and talk to the superintendent about it.
Let's shift gears just a little bit and let's talk about the other big role of a school board, and that is budget oversight. And I really like how you've been, and I realize this is from your perspective as a principal, so you think from building out, but I'm curious, kind of again, that role and how deep a board's oversight goes when they're looking at budgets for the coming years. And I always get this, and again, I'm cynical, so I always watch with that eye, right? I always get the feeling that of late our board has been very hands-on, maybe too much. I don't know, but from that perspective, how deep do they go in looking at and reviewing budgets? Is it just kind of that 30,000 feet, or are they really diving into what separate buildings are doing? Well,
you can tell by the way they've organized, the agenda for approving the budgets, which parts, they've looked at closely and which parts they haven't. If it's a line item, they want
don't give away the secrets.
Well, I'm just saying that, there are some things where you should trust, the people that work in the district. For instance, if I had, I was approving like the purchase of a new school bus or a series of new school buses, or we were transitioning into it. Well, certainly you would want oversight regarding that, but I absolutely would trust the director of transportation and then the assistant superintendent who oversees the director of transportation. I would trust their opinion about it. I wouldn't second guess that. I would say that, unless you had specific experience in purchasing buses or knowing about buses, you leave it to the experts. But the school board is elected to be fiscally responsible, and they should oversee they do oversee all of the budget, and they should examine the budget as closely as necessary. So I'm saying, I gave kind of a big example, but there are smaller examples where you can say, okay, I don't need to look at the, it cost $375.45 to do this, when that's not significant enough in the budget to spend a lot of time on. When you
can shave 75 cents on and off, and you have to do it. I think that's the way this works, right? And that's that's the school board's job, is to go over those sub $500 line items to squeeze pennies out of there. Well, I want to ask this question then to follow up on that. and I think it this is stuff that, like, we've kind of described a gray area, right? We've talked about there's a balance to be had in this sort of thing. And so I think you've given your opinion on some things and we've given our opinions and we've shaded that, but I want to broaden this out a little bit. Reasonable minds there's a range of reasonable disagreement here within, like, how much, where that balance lies. And I think we have examples perhaps of going too far one direction or another as the board and in this process. But there is that, isn't there? I mean, I would like to live in a universe where my opinion is the only one that really matters, but that's not what we live in.
He tries.
I try really hard. But I mean, that's something just to keep this in mind, is that when we're asking these questions, there's a range of opinions that are in the capacity of okay, correct? I mean, just so we're not saying that it must be this way as we're getting
there. Yes, I suppose. And again, who's gonna call you on it?
Boy, that's really taking a stance.
Yes, I suppose.
Okay, what I'm saying is, okay, so let's take special ed law. All right, that's law. That's law. It's federal law. There are laws, and there are very specific ways you have to go about when you have an IEP for a child. And school districts break those laws all the time. And until someone calls them on it, they get away with it. So I'm not sure what authority would go into a school board and say, hey, you're too involved in a building. That would be the superintendent to say, we need to talk about this. They do supervise that employee, the superintendent, but that superintendent in turn needs to partner with them to let them know when they've overstepped, or the voters, because they're elected officials, let them know when they've overstepped, but they're not breaking a law. I mean, does that?
I mean, you've demonstrated obviously that there are limits regardless of where they were. But I mean, I think that there is one way I tend to look at sometimes elections or hires, superintendent hires, even in this particular instance, is as a reaction to the last, chunk of time. Right. And so, for instance, when there was a lot of, I think when Dr. Carpenter was first hired, there was a lot of feeling left over from the end of Dr. McGahee's term that perhaps Dr. McGahee had too much independence, and the board was, and I'm not accusing him of this, but it was something of a rubber stamp for whatever Dr. McGahee wanted. And there was a response to that. Dr. Carpenter came in and had to attempt to administer in that environment, skipping all the other complications that came along in that reign. Yeah. And I think then you're seeing, not necessarily in this involvement versus non-involvement thing, but you see in Dr. Buck a response to the perceived ailments of what happened when Dr. Carpenter was superintendent. So we see that. And so I think these board elections can follow in the same way. And there is a range in there that we're dealing with here. And those are the kinds of reactions to see. And so we keep coming back to this every year. We have these interviews. Nick prefaced our conversation by, we've been having this conversation for 4 years, because I think the conversation keeps changing. And I want to, just understand that while we're talking about these roles, that there's a little bit of, there is leeway in there, and that reasonable minds can disagree on, how much supervision is the appropriate amount of supervision for the superintendent, or how much budget line item attention is the proper amount for a school board member.
Yeah, I think the previous 2 school board elections, we heard a lot of, and I may not get this talking point exactly, but we heard a lot of, we're too much from candidates saying our district has been too much top down. We need more bottom up, right? Which is, to me, another way of saying I'm pro teacher. But I'm curious, as we talk about this and we dig in, just John, and I'm just going to ask you your opinion on this from the perspective of a former teacher, of a former principal. what were some? I guess when you looked at a school board, and since you worked in a different district, when you looked at the school board that you worked with, your district worked with, were there examples of a good relationship where things, the process itself worked like it's supposed to?
Yes. um, so I worked at Fort Osage, like you said, and I was lucky that they just have at the time when I was there. I haven't worked there in a long time, but at the time when I was there, they had
It hasn't been that long.
longer than you think. I mean, it's longer than I think.
He earned his gray beard. Let him have it.
Yeah, I am definitely. Yeah. But
Sorry.
they had a tradition of boards that really collaborated with each other. So this is the other thing, sometimes boards just don't get along with each other, and they feel like they've got different agendas, which is always puzzling to me, because isn't the agenda to, help the district and help kids, and really, like, the better the school district is, the better your property values are. So I see the board as one of those, let's try to improve the community by improving the school. But okay. So I've seen it work really well, where my board that I worked with, they were cheerleaders for the teachers and the administrators in the district. And if they heard concerns, they went to the superintendent. The superintendent went to the assistant superintendent, which was my boss. And then she would come to me and say, hey, let me know about this. Then I would tell her, she would tell the superintendent would talk to the board president, and the board president would talk to the board member who brought it to him. And that's the way it's supposed to work. It's a system that's supposed to work that way. Now, there's steps between that system, so that, let's say it's a very heated, situation. The reason that there's steps in between is so people can be calmer and more reasonable along the way as you're finding out the information and then reporting back the information. Some of the heat of the moment is not there anymore. And that's how a system works. Sometimes it works to calm everybody down and make sure that reasonable decisions have been made or will be made. And but the boards collaborate with the superintendent, and then they stay in touch, though, with the buildings. So the way that happens is, the way it worked in my district was we took a turn. Every building did a report every month, and we did a big presentation to the board. And then they recognized, they came into our buildings. We invited them into our buildings to come look at classrooms. Like, if we had a teacher who was doing something really innovative, we would email the board members or call them and say, hey, come by and see this. This is really cool. And they would come by and see it. So it goes both ways, where the building principals, administrators are communicating with the board, and the board gets to see the wonderful things that go on. And then, the building principals are also presenting to the board, like the central office administrators do all the time. That's the way it worked. And it was very successful. It was a beautiful collaboration from top to bottom. And we had teacher groups. Okay. So I'm telling you from a principal perspective, we had teachers who also met with the board. So we had teacher groups that would meet with the superintendent separately. We also had teacher groups that met with the board president as well, especially when it came to contract negotiations, things that were a concern, and all of that. So it was transparency from top to bottom. And I think people appreciated that. And sometimes they didn't want to know everything, but they did. So
I think that's a good to show some examples, and I really wanted to ask you that so that it could be examples from outside the district, so that we don't get caught up into things that we really can't dig too much into. I want to shift gears a little bit, and I want to pick your brain some just on your perspective with what you're doing through UCM and the state education department. As we look to evaluating these candidates, and even look to the next board as it however it's comprised, what are you seeing from around the state that are maybe one or two issues that our school district needs to be preparing for, that maybe they're probably going to have to take up? And I know you mentioned one to me that it looks like teacher shortages are going to be a real thing for lots of school districts throughout our state.
Okay, yeah, I'd say Lee Summit is in a very advantageous position because they're a wealthy district. You know, they have a lot of resources. Teachers want to work in Lee Summit, and it's not nothing's perfect, you know, but I'm not saying this is like nirvana or anything. But as far as pay goes, as far as, you know, the community and everything else, it's wonderful. You know, I raised my kids here. I love it here. But at some point, it's going to affect Lee Summit. So right now, I work with schools. You know, I also teach at the university, so I'm teaching students who, you know, teachers who want to become principals. So I'm teaching classes like, you know, supervision and facilities and school law and things like that to prospective principals, you know, future principals and administrators. But I also work with a variety of schools. I work with, you know, tiny schools where, like, literally I met with the entire district staff and we were sitting around a table in their library. And that was every teacher in the district. And also with buildings and districts that have dozens of schools. So it's quite a variety. And I will tell you, I'm starting to hear, you used to be able to like throw a stick out into a field and hit an elementary teacher. And right now I'm finally hearing schools that say we have a fourth grade teaching position, or they don't usually specify like that, like an elementary teaching position. And we had 5 people apply, or we had nobody apply. I work with a district that had a secondary English teacher position. 0 people apply. 0 for an English teacher position. None.
Wow.
And so here's the issue. You know, we've spent a long time in this country, and I don't think I'm going to get any pushback from you guys, but I mean, because I don't think it's debatable, of teachers being the bad guys, of public schools being, you know, the villain in a lot of stories that are being told. And, you know, there's a lot of room for improvement in all those areas. But when you vilify an entire strata of our society, who wants to join that club? You know, who wants to be, you know, in the Legion of Doom or, you know, whatever? I mean, they're not going to join something where they're not getting any respect, or and they're hearing, and granted, teachers don't get paid a lot, but I will tell you, like, I worked at Fort Osage. The teachers in Fort Osage School District were the highest paid employees in the school district. I mean, it was a working class area. And while I wouldn't say, you know, we had skyrocket, you know, salaries or anything like that, because we didn't, I felt like we were well compensated, especially compared to the rest of the community. And teachers make a middle-class salary, and no, it doesn't equal like the level of education they have and maybe the level of experience, but it definitely has, you know, between the people saying teachers don't make enough money, which I guess there's a good argument to say they don't, and the people saying teachers are villains. Students are not going to college and wanting to major in education. I mean, why? Why would you do it?
Let me ask this question: and again, I'm just asking your opinion on this. In your opinion, is pay the reason we're seeing a shortage? Is that the thing?
No. That's my short answer. My longer answer is it's part of it, because, you know, you look at the amount of student debt you're going to have when you go to UCM, and I'm not an expert at that. Okay, so I'm not going to present myself here as someone who knows all about, you know, how much student debt people have. But if you're a student who had to take loans out from the time, you know, from your freshman year until you graduate, until your senior year, assuming you can graduate in 4 years, which, you know, some students can't, some students for various reasons don't graduate in 4 years. So you have all this debt, all right? And you're getting a job that starts at $45,000 a year. And, you want to buy a house, you absolutely have to have a car, and you're married, maybe, or maybe you're not, you are not rich. And when you're paying off student loans, plus, you've got whatever other expenses that you have in your own life, and commitments that you have, that's not a lot of dough, man, to live on, so, but is it better than some jobs? Yes, but those jobs don't come with,
And we're going to ask you to go back to
$100,000
school in a few years too.
Huh? I'm sorry.
And we're going to also ask you to go back to school in a few years.
Correct. And if you don't have your master's degree, forget about it. You'll never make decent money. And even in my position as an administrator, and look at all the building principals who have their doctorates. I had a friend tell me one time, it's like the union card. I mean, if you don't get your doctorate, you're not going anywhere. And it's, you look at how many building principals, certainly central office, administrators have their doctorate. It's the majority. And there's a reason for that, because you look at a bunch of applications and you look at people who have their doctorate versus people who don't have their doctorate. And it's pretty hard to justify, even looking at it when you look at the balance of who has it and who doesn't.
Well, so how can, when you look at something like this, how can a school board help the district prepare for having to have that conversation of, hey, we've got openings and it might be hard to fill them?
Well, so, okay, part of it is, the pay structure. Certainly. I mean, that I said that before, where that's not the major thing, and I truly feel that way. But if a district has to incentivize the staff, and it's not. I know, you had mentioned, bottom up versus top down, kind of approach. It's Lee Summit is not top heavy. If you look at the percentage that they spend on administration versus the districts in the metro area, it's one of the lowest. I mean, percentage wise. And I will tell you, the more teachers you have, the more administration you have to have. It's not something where you can just expand the amount of teachers you have and not expand the amount of administration that's needed, because those teachers all have to be supported. They have to have, administrative support to help them with management, professional development, various other things, just administrative stuff, secretarial stuff, things like that, offices, all those things have to be supported. So you can't just say, we're going to pay people more and put more kids in the classroom, or we're going to pay people more and have more teachers. It just doesn't, you've got to think, okay, so that's reactive. All right. So I'm saying, this is a reaction to say, we'll just pay more and it will solve our problem. And that is part of it. But you also have to start recruiting teachers, actively recruiting, and not just going, like I used to go to job fairs, like teacher job fairs at universities around the area. And I loved it. I loved talking to students who are majoring in education, talking to them about my district, talking to them about my building. And it was just fun. And I hired some of the best teachers, and they're still fantastic teachers that I initially hired, that I met when they were students, at different universities. It's a lot of fun, but that's not enough. We have to start growing our own. We have to start looking at students in our district, and we can tell the ones who are going to be leaders. And I will tell you, there are teachers who say, I worked with teachers who would tell their own children, do not go into education. It's not a good job to have. And that's the wrong approach. We need to be building our own, growing our own. I mean, that's the proactive part of it. Encouraging organizations, there's the high school, Future Teachers of America, encouraging those groups, but even younger, talking to kids about teaching, talking about education as a career, and especially students of color. You want to talk about, students, are just the disparity, that we have between, teachers of color and white teachers in the district. And, that there's a way to look at that, say, look, we've got students who live here in Lee Summit who could be teachers, and we're not promoting that. We're not encouraging that. Also,
I'm gonna throw in a little opportunity to promote. I like cross promotion here. If you go back to a previous episode of the Lee Summit Town Hall podcast and a conversation with Dr. Buck, the superintendent, he talks about a program that they're getting ready to launch next year, which is to encourage and grow more homegrown teachers.
Well, and that
they will have in the district. Are we seeing more districts do that kind of thing?
No. See,
is this a relatively new thing?
Well, I belonged to Future Teachers of America when I was in high school. And so it's not new in that regard, that there are organizations that encourage young people to consider, teaching as a career. I think the younger you get it, the younger you look at it and encourage kids, the better off you are. It's not new. But I will tell you that Lee Summit is going to be in a better position because of we're blessed with all this wealth in the district. They're going to be in a better position to have teachers to grow their own, to have programs like that. You look at a district, you go down the road, maybe Pleasant Hill would be the next one down that could do that. But you go down to, Calhoun, you go into, areas of Missouri that are not terribly far away from here, and you think, what are they going to do? What are these districts going to do? And it does affect us. You think, okay, Lee Summit, we're not a walled city. If the infrastructure for education breaks down in our rural areas, it's going to break down with us. It's all gonna flow this way. Well, you take the, like COVID response, I work in Warrensburg. My office is in Warrensburg at the university, and people who were sick with COVID would come to Lee Summit because the hospitals were full in Warrensburg, or they couldn't handle the people that were there, what they had. So they would come to Lee Summit. It's going to be this. It's going to be a similar thing. I'm telling you. Down the road, we need to. We need to support the entire infrastructure as a district as well.
Let me ask real quick as we wrap up, are there maybe just a few other issues you're seeing around that maybe our district ought to be prepped and thinking about as this new board will take its seats after the April election?
Yes. I do think that equity will be one of the main issues, and helping teachers and the community understand, the difference between equality and equity. I think we still have a ways to go to be able to take the politics out of schools. And honestly, it is the schools should be. There's no reason for it to be political. And I get that, when you're teaching history, when you're teaching science, that sometimes people get worked up over what you're teaching. And that's a good conversation to have. I think it's a fair conversation to have. But when it comes to running a district, it just seems like it should be as apolitical as possible. So I do see,
which is hard to do with the elective process involved.
Right. And
take the politics out of my election.
Well, I guess, is that the right way to say it? I mean, I'm saying, take.
No, I think you are. I was just.
Look, we're here for the jokes, John.
Okay,
it's okay.
Well, I'm here for the budget blinds. I heard there was free budget blinds involved in this.
We will write you a coupon and send you on downtown.
Well, John, I appreciate you coming on, and I just think it's important to start getting some different perspectives. What do other people look at as these elections come up, and kind of just the lens that you look through, I know is going to be different than mine and different than others. So I appreciate you coming on and offering that kind of just a peek of how you look at things, because this is a big district. There are very complicated, big budgets that you deal with in this, and even just that last topic that you mentioned, the equity mission that this district has, it's not simple.
No.
It's a complicated thing, and a lot of different things get involved. So I appreciate you taking some time tonight and giving us your perspective on things as we look to this next election.
All right. Well, I love being here, guys. Thanks a lot for having me.
Thank you, John.
John, I appreciate it. Jason, that's going to wrap us up for this week. We'll talk to everybody next time.